Millennials have more exciting things to do than be barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. Is that a problem or a blessing? We'll discuss on this episode of GrowthBusters.
Calling. Call a GrowthBuster. Whoa.
Welcome to GrowthBusters, the podcast about sustainable living. If you think recycling your plastic water bottles makes you green, well, buckle up. On this podcast, we explore how to get really serious about sustainability. I'm Dave Gardner, director of the documentary GrowthBusters, Hooked on Growth, and I am pretty excited to be introducing to you today Erika Arias. Welcome to the show, Erika.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for having me.
How's it feel so far?
Feels great. Happy to be here.
If you've been following the podcast in recent episodes, then you may know that our usual co-host, Grace Stark, has been AWOL for a while, and she's taken a break. She had a baby, and she's hoping to be back, and I think she might be, but it could be about 18 or 20 years, don't you think? Because you get busy. When you decide to be a parent, it really takes over your life. And so we decided to audition for a new co-host who might be somebody who would be a temporary replacement for Grace, or in my wildest dreams would be so awesome that even if and when Grace wants to come back, we would have 3 people on the podcast. Why not? So Erika responded to my casting call and said, I'd love to audition to be the co-host, and she passed with flying colors, and so here she is.
Hi, everybody. Yep, my name is Erika. I heard Dave was looking for not a replacement. Grace is excellent. I hope that the 3 of us maybe one day we'll all get to work together. Grace, congratulations, if you're listening.
I'm sure she is. She's going to want to know what we're doing without her. But what made you reach out? What makes you want to be a co-host of this podcast?
Yeah, I've been an avid listener and an advocate for overpopulation, and then found GrowthBusters after listening to the Overpopulation podcast. Started to kind of stalk you, Dave, and figure out like how you got into this area. And I want to eventually do research, and in this area I'm interested actually in the voluntary child-free choice as it relates to population sustainability, and that's not a very common area that people are talking about. So you've had a lot of really great guest speakers here on this podcast, and I think it would just be a really good place for me to learn more and grow with you all.
That's cool. Well, I'm pretty excited to have you, so welcome. But I'm guessing that the listeners don't want to see the sausage being made. They just want to enjoy the sausage. So maybe we should get down to it.
Let's. Today, I wanted to share a clip that I heard on Real Time with Bill Maher. It was the last segment of his show, which is New Rules, if anybody's familiar with that. It's kind of where he just shares a ton of things in popular media, and one of those things was the fertility rate dropping, and how that is not a bad thing, as many would believe it is. And so I'll go ahead and just let you play the clip.
All right, let's listen to a little bit of it.
And finally, new rule, let's take a break from bashing millennials for their safe spaces, man buns, and avocado toast, and give them credit for doing something right. Having less sex than other generations, and so less babies, which is good for the planet. Every week, it seems, there is a new study about how little sex millennials are having. Researchers at the Nunya Business Institute have found that people between the ages of 18 and 30 just don't like they used to, due to financial constraints, career aspirations, and mostly an unwillingness to put down the phone.
I think he's probably right about that phone thing.
Totally. People are addicted to their phones. Yeah, it's not just us, though. You know, it's like my dad. My dad's obsessed with the phone. He never puts that thing down. We have to have a new rule about that at the dinner table.
But less sex to save the planet. That's not a message we hear from everybody.
No, and isn't intentional. I don't know. Are people having less sex because they know they know where we're heading, or is it really due to social environmental factors? I mean, in either case, Bill Maher makes it pretty clear it's a good thing in general, which I strongly agree with. It's a great thing. Although I'm not a fan of people having less sex, you should still be having sex. You can have protective sex and
just less babies.
Less babies. That's the goal. Which brings us to our podcast title. What do you think about that, Dave?
Oh yeah, Masturbate, Don't Procreate. Well, because you're listening to this podcast and you couldn't see the Bill Maher clip, that was kind of the headline for this little bit that he did.
Yeah.
And so, well, I have to say, Erika really stepped in quickly to her role as co-host and has already set up a Google Doc so that the two of us can communicate and share real easily our plans for future episodes. And Erika, you put in the title for this episode in that Google Doc, Masturbate, Don't Procreate. And that shouldn't have shocked me, but I was taken aback a little bit, and I thought, oh, do we dare actually make that the title of our episode?
Yeah.
What was your thinking on that?
I had to actually stop for a minute. I wrote out that title and I stopped and I thought, I don't know what Dave's going to think about this. I know I'm a fan. I'm not one to step away from anything risky. I like the title. I wanted to be consistent. I think something that I commonly say that is sort of related is copulate, don't procreate. Mm-hmm. I did worry and still kind of do, like, are we offending our listeners? Which isn't something I want to do at all.
Let us know if it offended you. We might not change our ways because we really do need, we need to be bold. This is a bold podcast. We're talking about subjects that few people dare to discuss. And so I think you made the right move to suggest that.
Yeah, definitely write to us. If you are offended, we hope you're not. We like to talk about the real stuff.
But anyway, that's what makes Bill Maher so great. The show that he used to do was called Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher. And that is his brand, is to be politically incorrect. And in a way, it's really unfortunate that talking about safe sex even, or talking about having fewer children and how that actually will help our environment is still to this day a little bit politically incorrect. I really want to say it was politically incorrect for the last couple of decades, but isn't anymore. I think we're slowly moving out of the dark ages there and getting to a point where people are starting to talk about it more, and it's not so shocking.
Yeah, that's always a really good thing, a really good sign that the world is changing for the better. People are getting woke.
Yeah, and I'm going to take some credit for that. I think the work of the GrowthBusters podcast and the work of the Overpopulation podcast has been instrumental in that, but that's certainly not the only force at work. People like Bill Maher doing what Bill Maher did on his show, Real Time with Bill Maher, recently, that helps. And there are a number of good people and organizations around the world who are pushing the edge of the envelope and making it so we can talk about what we really desperately need to talk about, which is how are we going to achieve a sustainable human civilization. We're kind of running out of time to get it right.
Yeah, we're running out of time. If we don't do something about it now, if we're not having that conversation now, we're in big trouble. I have something to admit. I have not, but it is in my Amazon cart. I have not read The Population Bomb. But what I did read over the weekend were criticisms against the book. And it's on my summer reading list. I'm going to read it because you read it. And a lot of people that are interested in this area and overpopulation and sustainability have read the book. The main criticism I took from it was, how could somebody actually think that we are in trouble if everything that was predicted back then is not what it is now? And somebody had a counter argument saying, well, Ehrlich saved us. And if he hadn't have written this book, if people weren't talking about this back then we would be in a much worse place now. And that, I think, is still very much true today, and that very much applies to what we're talking about today, that if we're not having these conversations, if we're not talking about it and bringing awareness, then 5, 10, 20, so on years from now, we are going to be in a much worse place. So,
hey, that gives me a great idea. Why don't we invite Paul Ehrlich to be our guest on the podcast after you finish the book?
Yes!
Would you like to talk to him and ask him a few questions?
Yes. Sorry, that was my spooky ghost voice.
All right. Of course, if you don't know who Paul Ehrlich is, well, we'll certainly bring you up to speed in that episode. But just briefly, he was a quite famous Stanford biologist who in 1968, he and his wife wrote a book called The Population Bomb. And that book kind of made a big splash on the scene. And that was partly helped by the fact that for some reason, Johnny Carson really was interested in talking to Paul Ehrlich, and Johnny Carson is like the all-time great host of The Tonight Show. And he had Paul Ehrlich as a guest on his show over 20 times. So he gave Paul Ehrlich the microphone and allowed him to try to educate people a little bit about what kind of the missteps that we were making with human civilization and the relentless expansion of the human enterprise. But anyway, I'm pretty confident that we could get Paul to give us a little bit of his time on a future episode. So be sure and jot down your questions as you read the book.
Yes, will do. It's on my summer reading list, so hopefully we can invite Paul out very soon.
Great. Well, listen, there's a little bit more of that Bill Maher piece I want to play. Are you up for listening to a little more?
Totally.
But instead of asking why America's young people are having less sex, let's just be glad they are. Earth Day is coming up, and I can't think of a better gift to our planet than pumping out fewer humans to destroy it. People talk a lot about bringing a cloth bag to the market and driving electric, but the great under-discussed factor in the climate crisis is there are just too many of us, and we use too much shit. Climate deniers like to say, there's no population problem, just look out the window of an airplane, something but empty space down there. But it's not about space, it's about resources. Humans are already using 1.7 times the resources the planet can support. The world's population is increasing by 1 million people every 4.5 days, and that's just on the 405. We don't need smaller carbon footprints. We need less feet.
We don't need smaller carbon footprints. We need less feet. Actually, we do need smaller carbon footprints, but we also need less feet. And I think it was really great that Bill Maher actually did such a neat segment that brings attention to the fact that, and this is something that a lot of people don't, I think way more people don't understand this than do, and that is that if you're looking for the most impact at shrinking your carbon footprint or even your overall ecological footprint, there is nothing that comes close to being as effective as choosing to have one fewer child. That blows away driving a hybrid or riding your bike to work or taking the bus or even being vegan doesn't measure up. That's a good thing to do, and that has a huge impact on your carbon footprint, but not as big as having fewer children or no children. Here we are at 7.7 billion people on the planet. We need to find a way to get back way, way down to about 2 billion people unless we're willing to all live so incredibly simply. So we've got a lot of work to do, so it's really good news to hear that millennials are having less sex, because that does mean they're having fewer babies too. What's up with that? I'm not a millennial, so I don't know why that's happening. I can definitely confirm that it's expensive to raise a child. I think it's the Department of Agriculture that does the math every year or every 2 years. And the last report we got was that it costs the average family in the United States something like $237,000 or something like that. I'm just pulling that number out of my foggy memory to raise a kid. That's through high school. That doesn't include any college. It doesn't include any beer. That's a lot of money. And, and I think millennials they're coming of age in an era where we're not as optimistic about endless wealth. It's harder to graduate from college and start making a ton of money. You can't just assume that you're going to have a big raise year after year after year. So it makes sense. I'm glad that millennials are doing the math. And, some are having fewer kids in order to shrink their footprint. Some are having fewer kids because they're hesitant to bring a child into the world that they're afraid we are busy destroying, really, which is pretty sad. Yeah. Anyway, I've been reading this interesting piece called Are Millennials Having Less Sex Than Older Generations? that was published in Elite Daily and written by Candice Jalili. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. And this was published back in November, and I'll include a link to this in the show notes. But it was really kind of an eye-opener for me that teenagers are starting their sex lives later. There was a survey that found that the percentage of high schoolers who have been sexually active dropped from 54% to 40% between 1991 and 2017. That is pretty amazing. Millennials are predicted to have fewer sexual partners than either Gen Xers or baby boomers. And they also found sexually active adults went from having sex 62 times a year in the late 1990s to only 54 times in 2014. Maybe part of that's just being on the treadmill, too. You know, we talk a lot in the GrowthBusters podcast about the fact that we, you know, not only should we, when we're making family-sized decisions, aim for smaller families, fewer children, but that we also need to be skinnying up our lives. We need to be not living larger, but living more simply and getting back in touch with really the simple joys of life. Those are things that don't have huge carbon footprints or huge ecological footprints. And part of that is stepping off of that treadmill that a lot of us are on in service to this consumer society that we have. You know, we're programmed to believe that if we're successful, we're working way more than 40 hours a week, and then we're spending all of our money at the mall or at Amazon.com, and that we're darn sure going to be making more money next year than last year, and that success is... What are the signs of success? You live in a bigger McMansion than your best friend.
Have a better car. Have the most expensive clothes and jewelry. And
so if you are on that treadmill, you're having less sex. I can guarantee you that.
Well,
I think that's just one more joy we can put on the list of things that you have more time for if you get off that treadmill in service to consumerism.
True to that.
Anyway, we'll include a link to that story so that you can get acquainted with the rest of the good news, bad news, and those stats, I think.
Yeah.
What else have we got?
Well, I'm kind of interested in looking more into stats. I did see the link that you sent me. I think what really got my attention was kids are having sex at a younger age. I thought that was really surprising. Or I'm sorry, older age.
Yeah.
Which, right? Probably because they're in prep classes and having to prepare so many years in advance to get into a better high school, to get into a better college, and so on. That makes sense in that regard. But
I should add that if you're a millennial and you're listening to this and you're thinking that I'm encouraging you to have more sex, I'm encouraging you to have more safe sex.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
But not unprotected sex, because we definitely don't need any unplanned pregnancies. Unplanned pregnancies is a huge part of the population growth dilemma we face.
Absolutely.
Should we move on to the next item in the news?
Yeah, I had another one I wanted to share. It was Senator Mike Lee thinks babies will solve climate change. I think you have the clip I sent. It's a speech about the new Green Deal. And Mike Lee really just ruined it and said some of the worst.
The link that you sent is Steven Colbert on The Late Show.
Yeah.
Telling us about this. So certainly you'll get a chance to hear Mike Lee, but you'll also get to hear a little bit of Steven Colbert, his take on that.
Have a little laugh.
Yesterday, during a debate on the Green New Deal, Lee offered a novel solution to global warming.
Mr. President, this is the real solution to climate change. Babies, the solution to so many of our problems, at all times and in all places, is to fall in love, get married, and have some kids.
I like babies. I've made babies.
Yeah,
Some of my best friends were once babies, but getting married and making babies is a solution to all our problems at all times and in all places. Well, I'll tell you what's going on here, Mr. Jones. Your transmission is shot. It's going to cost you $800 for me to fix that, or you could make an honest woman out of Bethany. She looks fertile. Yeah, I'd do it. But I do like babies. I love babies. But Lee's justification for his baby theory made much more sense to no one.
Problems of human imagination are not solved by more laws. They're solved by more humans. More babies will mean forward-looking adults, the sort we need to tackle long-term, large-scale problems.
Yes, we can't do anything now to solve the long-scale problems our kids will be facing later. First, we have to have the kids, so there will be someone to do something about those problems. And yes, we're kicking the can down the road, and technically, that is litter. But litter is a problem they will have to solve. The point is, get it on, I mean raw dog, because we're not doing jack. Now, I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means.
Yeah,
I have no idea what that means. What it is. Lee continued.
American babies in particular are likely going to be wealthier, better educated.
Really? I'm not sure they're better educated. Have you seen former American baby Mike Lee? Lee's speech was inspiring in one way. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted about Lee, "If that guy can be senator, you can do anything."
So, yeah. I don't think... so I had a friend of mine actually send this to me, a really good friend of mine and knows me very well. And this made me really mad. Like, oh, how is this a solution? How would anybody say that this is a solution? It's like it's the opposite of a solution.
It really boggles my mind to think that somebody could be a U.S. senator and not be somehow acutely aware that the world is overpopulated, and that includes the U.S.
And AOC actually posted, and I read the beginning of her. I don't have a Twitter account, but I went in to kind of stalk it, her post, and she said, I struggle with imposter syndrome every now and then, which we all do. I myself do. And then she wrote, well, if that guy can be senator, then you can do anything. Yeah, very true. Very true.
Too many examples of that. But because you are considerably younger than I am, you might not be aware that there were a few pundits out there several decades ago who were pushing that message that human beings are the greatest resource, and the more babies we're making, the more geniuses we'll have, because some percentage of the population is going to be
Einstein
if we have 7.7 billion people on the planet and we have all these problems, well, we just need to have 12 billion people on the planet, and then maybe some of those new babies will grow up to be geniuses who will solve the problems that we're creating by overpopulating the planet.
I don't understand how that ever became statistically sound to anybody. The chances of somebody having an Einstein or an Obama or somebody that is able to solve like the problem of climate change or any like major problem, yeah, you'll probably have a really smart kid, but
yeah, and I can't help but think that
if that's your reason for bringing life into the world, that's a really bad reason to have a child. I'm banking on this, but do I even want to be a parent? Can I even be a parent? And all of those things are concerning to me.
Yeah, good points.
Yeah, and there are still a lot of people that think in that way. I myself, I identify as I'm voluntary child-free. That is a strong part of my identity. And when people hear me talk about that, I get some people that really question why I don't want children, that's the most natural thing that anybody can do, and there's something wrong with me, and X, Y, and Z, and blah, blah. But when I tell them my reasons, and a lot of them are, because I'm conscious about the environment, because I'm conscious about where the world is going, and it is worrisome. But that is a common response that I get. Well, what if you have a genius that is able to solve some major world problem? Well, that's still a really bad reason to make a life.
Yeah, and I would think that out of 1 billion people, there'd be plenty of geniuses.
Yeah, where are they?
I don't think we need 10 billion people to have enough geniuses. But you reminded me of something, Erika, and that is, I think, another reason perhaps millennials are having fewer children, tell me if you think there's some validity in this theory, is that we are at a place where it's so easy now for every woman who's coming of age there's a cornucopia of possibilities in her life. She's not limited. She doesn't have to have a very vivid imagination to imagine ways to count in life, ways to contribute, ways to have a meaningful life beyond being a mother.
Yeah.
50 years ago or 70 years ago, there were a lot more limitations because, we just didn't give women equal treatment in business and in so many other parts of living. So making babies was it just looked like that was their job. That was why they existed. But now, I think you'd be pretty hard-pressed to grow up with that feeling, wouldn't you?
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly not something that I'm very lucky to have never felt that I needed to do that. That was my role in life. It's hard to say. I think that in part that could be the case. Yeah, women, this is a really great time to be alive. In some parts of the world, this is a really great time to be alive as a woman. But I think also what I'm hearing a lot is not right now. So, and I think that is very environmentally and socially shaped, where even though women don't have any interest in having children right now, they intend to in the future. And in vitro, or freezing your eggs, make it possible for a woman to make these decisions much later in her life. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think it's definitely a lot easier, and women just have a lot more options for how to live out their lives.
Forgive me for bouncing it around a little bit, but I want to circle back to, Senator Mike Lee and just how incredulous it is that we would have a senator who doesn't understand that we have a serious overpopulation problem. So making lots of babies can't solve that problem, let alone many others. And I'm not impressed with Mike Lee, but I guess I want to make a point about the world, about just the level of illiteracy about overpopulation that there is, because even some of the good people, even some of the smart people don't really recognize this. And I don't have audio on this, but I still want to share with you this example. Do you ever watch Chris Cuomo on CNN?
Have, but not often, no.
Well, he does this primetime show on CNN, and I like him. He's a smart guy, and he tries to do a show that is, it's more thoughtful than a lot of the cable pundits out there. So I have a lot of respect for him. But early in April, he was having a discussion about U.S. President Donald Trump's statement that the U.S. is full, talking about immigration. And Chris Cuomo said he doesn't think the U.S. is full. So let me quote Chris. He said, "In fact, people would say we need people. We got to keep having babies, so we keep expanding. Otherwise, we wind up like those European countries. They are dealing with the diminishment of their potential and human gain." End quote. Now, Chris did say people would say, so maybe that whole line was him just quoting other people and not necessarily saying what he believed. I hope that's the case, but I was still kind of shocked to hear that come out of his mouth. The fact that European countries are dealing with the diminishment of their potential and human gain, he's talking about European countries that are beginning to experience contracting population, and that is such good news. I mean, they're not having to even try to do that, and yet they are moving toward a sustainable population level. The U.S. isn't anywhere close to doing that. We've got some really hard work to do. So we shouldn't be feeling sorry for those European countries.
No, and I think something to say about that. I think a lot of people worry about social programs and who's going to be paying for this stuff. When we have an aging population and there are no young people to support the aging population, what are we going to do? Well, sorry, but if that's going to be our argument for continuing to grow, we're not going to have anything. It doesn't matter who's going to be paying for these programs. There isn't going to be a space to have these programs, a space that's livable. So yeah, I think initially it might be really hard. You might struggle like anything, but
that struggle is pretty minor compared to the struggle of trying to figure out how to meet the needs of an ever-growing population. And in fact, you're describing a Ponzi scheme. Mm-hmm. No one would argue with you and try to tell you that a Ponzi scheme can go on forever. No one believes that. But it's interesting, what a great segue, because I wanted to share something that I read in Forbes recently. This was called "The World Economy is a Pyramid Scheme," Stephen Chu says. Stephen Chu, who's a physics professor, I think, and was Secretary of Energy, said in a recent presentation, "Increased economic prosperity and all economic models supported by governments and global competitors are based on having more young people, workers, than older people. Two schemes come to mind. One is the pyramid scheme, the other is the Ponzi scheme." So that's just like you were saying. That's a terrible reason to have a baby. How would you like to say that to your child? I brought you into this world because I wanted to make sure that you were paying into Social Security so I can sit on my butt when I'm 75.
Well, I think a lot of parents indirectly say that to their kids, it's really sad to say, but the number of times I hear parents say, "Oh, I have kids so that somebody can take care of me." Or, "Wait, Erika, you don't want to have kids. Who's going to take care of you when you get old?" "Oh, I'm going to take care of myself, and that's just how it's going to go." I'm not going to have a kid to, hoping that they'll take care of me, because I'm sorry, unfortunately, a lot of times people have kids and then later find their kids just don't take care of them. So why?
Yeah, you can't count on that.
You can't.
Something to consider, because if any of these things are missing, if you don't have kids who are going to take care of you in your old age, or you don't have great Social Security set up because we've disassembled the Ponzi scheme and we don't have endless masses paying in to your retirement account, then you do need to think about some alternatives. And I think being part of a good community, having really close friends, having agreements with your close friends that you're going to help each other as you age.
Yeah.
Doing a good job of saving money
Yeah.
so that you have a nest egg.
Yeah.
So there's lots of other options.
There's a lot of other options. I like that you said that, just building your community. I'm a firm believer of you create your family when you grow up, and I really like that.
But it's not that often that we hear or read an elected official talk about the fact that it is a Ponzi scheme, that this whole notion of needing to have at least as many people in each generation, if not more people in each successive generation, in order to keep the economy growing, in order to pay into Social Security. They're all usually so growth addicted and so programmed from birth to believe that that is just the way the world works. It's a breath of fresh air to read this by Stephen Chu.
It really reminds me, too, of somebody you had on your show very recently, worst memory, I don't remember. But he sort of compared humans to cattle on the farm, and how we're the cattle, we're being fed big pharma, big agri food industry. Yes. And that was just mind shattering. Oh my gosh, how have I never thought of this before? That was really scary, but I'm really glad that he said that. And it's all to benefit these people at the top who are kind of just controlling everything we eat and do. And then he called our healthcare system the death care system, which isn't that far-fetched, Yeah.
Yeah, in case you didn't hear that episode and Erika's piqued your interest, that was just like an episode or two ago.
Yeah.
I don't recall the episode number, but we'll include a link in the show notes to that, and I'll include a link in the show notes to that Forbes piece about Stephen Chu. You know what occurred to me while we were listening to Stephen Colbert's bit about Mike Lee? In this episode, we shared with our listeners a couple of really good statements by notable entertainers, real celebrities, who communicated the kind of message that we struggle to get out there week in and week out. And of course, millions and millions of people will see those or hear those. And Stephen Colbert and Bill Maher, I want to shake your hand. I want to thank you. I want to congratulate you. And I'm thinking maybe we need to come up with some kind of a an award or a statue or something to give to people who are influencers when they say something like this that will actually make such a huge difference in helping our civilization become more sustainable.
Yeah, like having a wall of excellent people. I'm definitely up for doing that. Bill Maher, Steven Colbert, you are on our wall of excellence. Yeah.
The Wall of Excellence.
The Wall of
There we go.
Excellence.
We just started it. Yeah, it just began. On this episode, recorded on Earth Day of 2019. Let's see, what are you doing a week from Tuesday? I think we should have a big ceremony and invite them. They'll come.
Yeah. I have Bill Maher's number. I can just give him a call, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
You've got them on speed dial. But really, I hope we see more of that. And, they're not the only examples out there. And let's pledge to try to share more of those every chance we get. Whenever we find one, we'll definitely share that with our listeners.
Yeah, I really like sharing those. And I really get excited when I hear about it in the media because we don't hear about it enough. And there are a lot of people out there that don't know about it. So when they hear about it, it's not something that they tune into immediately. So it's really nice to have somebody with such a prominent voice speak up.
Yeah, they're opening doors and pushing the edge of that envelope a little bit and making it a little easier for everybody else to follow and start talking sense.
Yeah.
That's what we do here on the GrowthBusters podcast. We talk sense.
We talk sense.
Well, thanks, Erika. I think this has been a blast having you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
And I want to thank you, our listeners, for caring about living sustainably. And you know what? You can help spread this kind of enlightenment. Rate and review the podcast. Recommend it to your friends. Subscribe so you don't miss an episode. It's free. And you might think about supporting the GrowthBusters project. It's a nonprofit project. Click donate at growthbusters.org if you like what we're doing. And thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Some may dream to pave mountains and streams, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Some may just want more, but don't know what it's for, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Don't want a solution at the cost of pollution. They think bigger is better at the cost of the weather. But no, not us. We are the growth busters. Calling, 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 calling. Call the growth busters.